The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
For months since the repeal of net neutrality, I've been talking about this Senate effort to basically undo the repeal of net neutrality, or in other words, it's sort of a Senate bill to reinstate net neutrality. And I've said so many times that net neutrality, internet freedom, we also talk about it. This is one of those meta issues that when we talk about whatever political issue is important to you, it's sort of controlled by, or it depends on, things like campaign finance and the economic system that we have, and net neutrality. That's a big part of what we're talking about. And the Senate was able to pass this bill 52-47, meaning that every Democrat in the Senate, plus Republican Susan Collins, who we knew had said she was going to vote for it, Republican John Kennedy, and yes, much to Pat's delight, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, all three of them joining Democrats in passing this bill to return to Obama-era net neutrality laws. Here's the big, exciting moment from the Senate.
The yeas are 52, the nays are 47. The joint resolution is passed.
Wow. Nothing more exciting than an announcement of who voted how in the Senate. Except the problem is now it goes to the House where it's probably going to die. So what do we do next? Do we just forget about it and move on? I say no. I think, number one, lobby your members of Congress, get information about how to do it most effectively at battleforthenet.com. They've been following the net neutrality issue for a very, very long time. And the reason I think it makes sense to go through the process, lobby your members of Congress, have the House vote, is because even if it fails to pass the House, which it probably will, it's going to put all members of the House on record as either being for net neutrality, as being against net neutrality, or for some of them probably as not caring enough about it to even cast a ballot on it. And that could be useful in November, right, for voting out these anti-net neutrality clowns. And of course, if by some unusual circumstance the House passed it, it would go to Trump. And yeah, in all likelihood, Trump would veto it since it was his FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, who catalyzed getting rid of net neutrality to begin with. But you know what? With Trump, you kind of never know, right? If someone says to Trump 2 minutes before it gets to his desk, hey, what about signing this and going through with the reinstatement of net neutrality, even though it'd be totally incoherent with the policy that he's espoused, he might, in some kind of confused stupor, just say, sure, I'll sign this thing if the right person gets to him. So I don't think that it's a waste of time. I think there is value here. But if you told me that you want me to assess the chance of this becoming the law, reinstating net neutrality, it's not very likely. And that's really where I think the focus should be. There should be consequences for elected officials who oppose net neutrality. Chuck Grassley, for example, Republican from Iowa. Get this guy the hell out of here and use the fact that he's opposed to net neutrality to do it. John Thune, whoever, right? Get these people out. And this is when it's important to remember, Democrats and Republicans are not the same. It's a losing argument to say these are the two establishment parties and it doesn't make any difference who you vote for. Democrats and Republicans are very similar on very important major issues. Most importantly, I would say they're almost 100% complicit in perpetuating the existence of the broken campaign finance system that got them into office in the first place. And why wouldn't they? That's how they gained power. But this is not like a pet issue, net neutrality. It's not a niche concern. Republicans and Democrats are worlds apart on this. In the Senate, every Democrat voted to reinstate net neutrality. Only 3 Republicans did. So to play the game of, man, politicians are all the same, they're all corrupt, and it doesn't matter who you vote for, so I'll stay home, or vote for some third-party candidate who I agree with on some things, but is a whack job in general, that's a losing argument, and it's really important for us to understand that on really important issues, there's no similarity at all between Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, devil's advocate, this seems like it's going to be more of a statement vote, has very little chance of passing, as you laid out. Could we draw a comparison to when Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare 61 times, knowing that the president at the time was not going to repeal his signature piece of legislation?
No.
Wasted all this time and money and effort?
We can't draw an analogy to that because, number one, the Obamacare was public in a way, the entire debate around Obamacare and the controversy around it was public in a way that is very, very different from net neutrality. And on Obamacare, you had people who were proactively opposed to it. There's a very small contingent of people, voters, that are actually against net neutrality. It's more indifference and just sort of like let them do what they want. I think that there's very little that's analogous between the two.
I would also argue that there's a big difference between 1 vote and 61 votes.
That's also true. That's also true. Why is it that it's so much of an uphill battle on this, right? Why is it even a fight for internet freedom? Why is the default that the corporations and ISPs get their way and the people get screwed sort of as a matter of regular doing business? It's part of the problem with the system we have. It's an ugly system. It's a hideous and immoral system. And yeah, it'll most likely be an effort that dies in the House, but it's an important issue. It's too important not to fight. And that's why I'm encouraging you to go to battleforthenet.com, get informed, lobby your members of Congress. We've all of a sudden learned a lot about that infamous Trump Tower meeting involving a Russian lawyer named Natalia Veselnitskaya. Donald Trump Jr. was at the meeting, Paul Manafort was at the meeting, Jared Kushner was at the meeting, and many others. And by every indication, this was an attempt at collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. There was a quid pro quo discussed where there would be potentially a reduction in sanctions through the Magnitsky Act in exchange for the damaging dirt on Hillary Clinton that Natalia Veselnitskaya said that she would be able to provide. And over time, we've debunked a lot of the lies about this. There was the lie that Donald Trump Jr. wasn't really going into the meeting expecting dirt, the lie that the Russian lawyer wasn't connected to the Russian government in any way. But only now have we really learned about the testimony related to that meeting, because the Senate Judiciary Committee, in issuing a report that they believe, yes, that there were attempts by Russia to interfere with the election in 2016 to help Donald Trump, also released 2,500 pages of testimony and exhibits yesterday. And it is now clear beyond any doubt that Donald Trump Jr. wanted to collude with Russia. And the big takeaways are, number one, the people at the meeting said that no dirt about Hillary was actually provided at the meeting. We knew that already. It was promised to be delivered later. Very good. Number two, because of testimony from Rinat Akhmetshin, he's the Russian-American lobbyist who was at the meeting, he claimed that Donald Trump Jr. knew exactly what the meeting was about and actually said early on during the meeting, quote, "I believe you have some information for us." So the idea that Donald Trump Jr. didn't think there was going to be dirt, didn't expect there to be dirt, is absolutely bogus. We also read about testimony from Rob Goldstone, who was involved in setting up this meeting, and he testified that Natalia Veselnitskaya did indeed lobby Don Jr. about those Russian sanctions known as the Magnitsky Act and how those sanctions should be lifted. We were also previously told that Jared Kushner was only at the meeting for a little bit of it and then left. Rob Goldstone testified under oath that Jared Kushner stayed for the entire meeting, yet another possible Jared Kushner lie. And then we also learned more about, remember that quote that has been attributed to Donald Trump Jr., where he was told about the possibility of this dirt from Natalia Veselnitskaya? And he said, "If it's later in the summer, I love it." We now have the full context of that email from Donald Trump Jr., which said, "Thanks, Rob, I appreciate that. I am on the road at the moment, but perhaps I just speak to Amin first. Seems we have some time, and if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Could we do a call first thing next week when I am back?" That's not exactly the email and the language used by someone who's not really interested in the dirt and doesn't really think that there would be dirt. That's the email of someone who wants to, as quickly as possible after he returns from a trip, get on the phone and figure out when they might be able to have the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya. We heard from Heather, there was in the testimony that we saw transcripts of, there was a moment where Heather Sawyer, who's a counsel for Dianne Feinstein, asked Donald Trump Jr., "What did you mean that you loved it? What did you love?" And she went on and said, did you mean that you loved potentially incriminating information on Hillary Clinton? And Donald Trump Jr. said, yes. He was asked in testimony whether he told Trump Sr. about the meeting, and he says that he did not. Very difficult to believe. He also said that he didn't think there was anything wrong with meeting a Russian lawyer promising dirt on Hillary Clinton ahead of the election. And he also said he couldn't remember whether he discussed the entire thing with his father. And that starts to become the trend. I didn't do anything wrong, and I also don't remember. And I have a really hard time believing that Donald Trump Jr. just has no recollection about whether he told Donald Trump Sr. that he met with the Russian lawyer promising dirt on the opponent. If he's lying about not remembering, he actually still can be prosecuted. There's this idea that floats around that if you just say you don't remember, you can't be prosecuted because you're not saying something one way or the other. You can actually be prosecuted for these so-called intentional memory problems. Very unlikely. Like, I don't think Donald Trump Jr. is actually going to get in trouble for that. But the gaps in his memory are very, very bizarre.
Yeah, like, I don't know how you would prove that he did, in fact, remember.
Correct.
But I think it's pretty clear that Don Jr. told his dad about it because
I think so.
It was such a small organization, that campaign. And this meeting, after all, took place at Trump Tower. Plus, what was it, like a few days after the meeting was planned, Trump promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton to a national audience.
Minutes after the meeting took place, Trump was tweeting about those missing 33,000 emails. So the timing of it is even more suspect. And we actually have a bit of transcript to put up on the screen. Just another element here. Donald Trump Jr. was asked, according to this document, 25 minutes after the first call ended, related to this meeting, you made an outgoing call to that same number. But in between the two calls, there's another entry, a call at 4:27 that lasted 4 minutes from a blocked number. Between Amin's call to you at 4:04 and your return call to him at 4:31, with whom did you have a call? Donald Trump Jr. saying, I have no idea. And of course, 9 minutes later, Donald Trump tweeting for the first time about Hillary Clinton's missing 33,000 emails. So the timing stinks. The lack of memory from Don Jr. absolutely stinks. And these transcripts raise even more questions. The intent to collude, and again, that's not a legal term. That is a colloquial term, which can include a couple of different crimes potentially. The intent to collude is abundantly crystal clear, and we only have more questions and even fewer answers as a result of these transcripts, which we will obviously continue to follow and see how they play into Robert Mueller's investigation. Send me your thoughts. What do you make of the transcripts? I'm on Twitter at dpakman. Show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to say a big thank you to today's new member of the day, Mark Ash. Mark, thank you for being a member. Thank you for supporting the work that we do. And I also want to thank Howard Bruce II, who's our long-term member of the day. He's been with us since 2012, nearly 6 years of membership for Howard. Mark and Howard, thank you. Join them at joinpakman.com. You'll get the bonus show, the commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, and much more. And you can use the coupon code VOTESOON18 if you want a little discount. You can also make a very quick and easy pledge of as little as $1 a month through Patreon at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's get into some notable discussions that our audience is participating in. We do have a David Pakman Show subreddit. You can find it at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. A few interesting posts I noticed this morning. One says, we should go to war with Iran. This is a user who's making the case that, listen, we took out Saddam's government in 3 weeks. His military was superior to Iran's, that it's inevitable that they are Islamic fundamentalists who in their constitution specify to spread Islam through violence and are not rational actors. And the idea here from this user is, it's inevitable. Let's just do it, get it over with, and then move on. And of course, a lot of people in our audience pointing out that even if that's true, we'd rather someone other than Trump manage it. Like, there's a lot of people in our audience who are just saying it's a bad idea to go to war with Iran. But then others are saying, even if we grant the premises that you're outlining, Trump's the last guy we want managing that. So a very interesting and agitated discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit. Also, it has been revealed that the founder of Home Depot, Ken Langone, not Langore as spelled on this tweet, on this post, but Ken Langone, referred to Bernie Sanders as the Antichrist in an article where he was interviewed and people calling for a boycott of Home Depot. I admit I sometimes do go to Home Depot when I need I find that local hardware stores that I've been to provide absolutely horrible service. So I actually am a customer of Home Depot, but referring to Bernie as the Antichrist, I find that off-putting, I will admit.
Is it off-putting? I don't think it's that bad.
Really? It seems pretty bad. It's like when the nuts would say Obama's the Antichrist. I wouldn't go and then do business with them if they had a business, which most of them didn't. But glad to know about Ken Langone's position. Another post on the David Pakman Show subreddit, pointing out that Bernie Sanders recently said, there are some people in the Democratic Party who want to maintain the status quo. They would rather go down with the Titanic so long as they have first-class seats. I like that quote, and what it's in reference to is the blame, effectively, of the Democratic Party for policies that aren't in line, and we can put that back up. There are a few other bullet points here. Policies that aren't in line with what most Americans support, being overly focused on the Trump-Russia connection, accepting and courting the wealthy for donor money, continuing to hire useless but expensive political consultants, basically pointing out the problems with the Democratic establishment. You know, I've talked about this before. I agree that there are major problems with the Democratic establishment, but some of these are just a little bit much for me. Like, there's nothing wrong with fully investigating Trump-Russia collusion. Let's continue to do policy. Let's continue to prepare for the midterms. But the idea that that is merely a distraction of the Democratic establishment, I disagree with. But I generally speaking, agree with the quote from Bernie that there are people with the relationship to the Democratic Party is like wanting first-class seats on the Titanic. And lastly, in relation to Jared and Ivanka Trump, an article pointing out that they were recently blessed by an Israeli rabbi who once compared black people to monkeys. Yeah, the hangers-on that surfaced as a result of the move of the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem are just really vile characters. There's not only this Israeli rabbi who once compared black people to monkeys that blessed Jared and Ivanka, but we also had Robert Jeffress, who said Jews are irredeemably going to hell, brought to actually participate in the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem. We had John Hagee, who I don't even remember his full list of just absolutely horrible comments about Jews. He was involved in the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem. It's just a horrible and disgusting cast of characters, and I'm glad that people on the subreddit are pointing this out. You can join the subreddit. More than 6,000 of our viewers and listeners regularly participating now at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Let's get to something that is very, very notable in that it seems to be going completely unmentioned by many of the people on the right who touted the results of the House Intelligence Committee's Trump-Russia investigation. You might remember that not long ago, Donald Trump cheered what was very obviously a premature declaration from the House investigation into Trump-Russia, that lo and behold, big surprise, there was no interference by Russia to help Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and not even any more reason to keep investigating it. And the investigation is over. And Trump cheered it at the time and said, this is absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, we knew at the time that it was ridiculous to suggest that the House panel had done an even remotely thorough job to figure out the truth of what took place. We knew that the investigation was being run initially by the Trump transition team member, Devin Nunes. We knew that they hadn't even interviewed a bunch of the primary players in the entire thing when they decided, I think we're done. But somehow that's the conclusion they came to. They said, we're done. There's nothing to see here. And Trump believed it, or at least he cheered it and pretended to believe it. As I've always said, the Senate Intelligence Committee has been doing their own investigation, and it doesn't have the power or the authority of the Robert Mueller investigation, but at least they seem to be taking it somewhat more seriously than Republicans on that House panel did. And what the Senate Intelligence Committee has issued is a finding that, yes, Russia did interfere in the 2016 election. specifically to the benefit of Donald Trump. A quote from the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr: "There is no doubt that Russia undertook an unprecedented effort to interfere with our 2016 elections. The Russian effort was extensive, sophisticated, and ordered by President Putin himself, and for the purpose of helping Donald Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton." This is directly at odds with the House committee's findings, but it is exactly in line with the findings of the entire intelligence community of the United States. It's in line with common sense. And again, this is the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee saying this. It's not some ideological Democratic shill or whatever they'd call him if he were a Democrat. But the obvious question is, the important question is anything going to be done now? Are they even going to act to prevent Russia from interfering again in just 6 months during our midterm elections? Because anybody saying we got him now, nothing's going to happen unless they can prove that Trump actually worked with Putin. That's the new moved goalpost standard. So the strongest case now that is there to be made is only by Robert Mueller. That's the only way I believe we're going to get consequences, whether it's conspiracy to defraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, financial crimes, whatever. I simply don't believe there will be any consequences as a result of the Senate committee saying, yeah, it happened. And it happened after the House committee said it didn't happen. And I read something that, I don't know if this is true, but it certainly strikes me as plausible. There's speculation that this report and this statement from the Senate Intelligence Committee was done in exchange for some Democrats jumping on board and supporting Gina Haspel for CIA director. The idea is Republicans would jump on board with a report saying, yeah, Russia interfered to help Trump, if Democrats would help get Gina Haspel through, which is quite frankly sickening and disgusting, but not altogether surprising, because this is, we talked earlier, right? Net neutrality. Democrats and Republicans, world apart. All Democrats in the Senate supporting net neutrality reinstatement, 3 Republicans supporting it. Couldn't be more different on net neutrality. On making these types of deals just to get something that you would call a political win, Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same.
Yeah, and of course, Trump can't really get away with saying that he believes one congressional committee, but not the other congressional committee.
Well, he could try.
The only way he could do it is by pointing out some way that the Senate committee is not credible. And if that report turns out to be true, he would actually have a case to be made there.
Yeah, although we don't have any evidence that that's the case.
Sure.
Right? If we actually have evidence of the opposite, which is that when you've got someone that was part of your transition team running the House investigation until it becomes embarrassingly obvious that he's in the tank for Trump and is running to the White House to tell Trump what they're doing, that's really the one that's not credible, right? So absolutely disgusting at every level. And most disgusting is that there's not going to be any consequences. There simply will not be consequences to this. If you disagree, if you believe that, I don't know, something will come of this report from the Senate about their findings, let me know. Discuss this on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break, plenty more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Travis Lupick, who is an award-winning... Wait, you know what? Did you say Lupick or Lupick? Now I'm doubting.
Lupick.
You did. Okay, Lupick.
Happens all the time.
Take it from the top. Here we go. It's great to be joined today by Travis Lupick, who's an award-winning journalist and author of the book Fighting for Space: How a Group of Drug Users Transformed One City's Struggle with Addiction, referencing your work in Vancouver, which is very, very interesting. Let's start, Travis, if we can, with, here's sort of just a fundamental question. Is there something uniquely different about the opioid epidemic that we're currently experiencing than other drug epidemics that we've seen in the past?
The drug crisis that all of North America faces today is different from similar crises of the past because of fentanyl. This maybe began in a lot of areas with prescription drugs, but it is now very much a heroin and a fentanyl crisis. For those who don't know, fentanyl is a synthetic opiate that's significantly more stronger than heroin. And usually when users are taking drugs, they don't know that fentanyl, this dangerous substance, is in there. So there's that extra degree of uncertainty in the crisis we're facing today that makes this a really tricky problem.
With regard to how law enforcement and first responders are sort of trained and empowered to deal with apparent or potential or real overdoses, talk a little bit about how you feel that things like police carrying Narcan and other sort of rescue medications relates to the broader treatment of this epidemic. Is that generally something that we like the results of or that we should be concerned about?
It's getting better, law enforcement's role in responding to this crisis. It wasn't until recently that a lot of police officers were even carrying the so-called overdose antidote naloxone. So it's good to see them involved. Interestingly, though, in Vancouver, police actually don't respond to an overdose call. When someone calls 911 for an overdose, that call does not go to a police department. It only goes to fire and ambulance, which the idea is hopefully removes a degree of hesitation that some drug users might have to call 911.
Yeah, and that gets to the sort of discussion around decriminalization versus legalization. And, you know, in the United States, when it comes to marijuana, there's sort of a patchwork of laws depending on the state that you're in. Of course, marijuana is still illegal at the federal level. And there's this big debate about decriminalization as a good first step towards legalization versus the idea that these are sort of two really separate paths with very, very different implications. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, practically speaking, why is the difference between decriminalization and legalization so important?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy you asked that question because I think it is one of the most important questions that we have in this debate on drug policy in the context of the crisis right now. Decriminalization deals with the demand side. So all decriminalization does is remove criminal laws that make it illegal for people to hold drugs for personal possession. Legalization goes the next step. It's much more complicated. It involves fully legalizing and regulating substances, sort of possibly similar to how we regulate tobacco and alcohol. So the idea, advocates for decriminalization say it would remove stigma, it would bring drug use out to the open, it would encourage people to seek help, seek treatment, but it would not solve the fentanyl crisis that we talked about earlier. Decriminalization would leave supply in the hands of dealers and organized crime, whereas legalization, the next step, would remove drug supply from organized crime and bring it under the control of government.
Right. So even in cases where we've seen legalization, like, for example, in Colorado in the United States with marijuana, it doesn't eliminate the black market, but it significantly reduces it. Does decriminalization do anything at all to deal with the black market aspect of the supply?
It really doesn't. And while I'm an advocate for decriminalization, this is why I think we have to be cautious about it. It's a first step, in my opinion, but it would not solve the fentanyl crisis. Supply would remain in the hands of organized crime, and organized crime would continue to poison these drugs with fentanyl.
What about the public sort of stigma? I guess, or let me rephrase it a different way. Do you have any strong feeling as to whether legalization more drastically changes the public perspective on a particular substance compared to just decriminalization?
Yeah, again, I think decriminalization is an important first step because I do believe it would go a long way in changing public opinions towards drug use. If drug use is no longer a criminal matter, we can truly let it become a healthcare matter and encourage people to seek treatment, to speak about it more openly because it won't be criminal anymore. Legalization would continue that process. It would sort of normalize drug use, and I mean that in a positive way. It would allow people to use drugs out in the open, not using drugs alone, where if they overdose, there's no one to catch them if they it would allow us to control how the public perceives drugs. For example, a lot of jurisdictions have large warning labels on packages of cigarettes. We could do the same sort of thing with dangerous drugs as opposed to leaving market in the hands of organized crime where it is now.
Can you tell us more about what's been done in Vancouver? You already talked about how when you call emergency services for a possible or actual overdose in Vancouver, police don't respond. You basically have ambulance and firefighters, and that it's really dealt with as a health incident, not as a criminal incident. What else has been done in Vancouver?
Yeah, so first to give people an idea of the scale of the problem here, Vancouver's overdose crisis is about on par with Philadelphia's is a good comparison. About 50 overdose deaths per 100,000 people is the rate, and then that is an astronomical rate of overdoses. It's something really scary. In response, the government has taken some really radical measures, mostly since the winter of 2016. So when you call 911, police don't show up. The call only goes to medical and fire. We have essentially flooded the streets with the overdose antidote naloxone. It's free. You get it over the counter in pharmacies. You walk down the street in Vancouver, you see it clipped to people's belts. It's really everywhere. We've also opened a ton of new sort of low barriers supervised injection sites, places where people can bring illegal drugs, mostly heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine, and use them under the watchful care of staff who can respond in the event of an overdose. Vancouver, of course, established North America's first supervised injection site in 2003. We only had that one site for the entire next decade. Since the winter of 2016, our city alone has opened more than half a dozen additional sites, and they're reversing overdoses every single day.
So there are people who will hear you talk about, supervised places to use for recreational drug use, and they'll say, that in the net will increase the number of people engaging in risky behavior with drugs. What evidence do we have to push back against that talking point?
Yeah, and I do understand that talking point. There is logic behind it, but the data does not actually tell us that's what occurs. Insight, North America's first supervised injection site in Vancouver since 2003, is very possibly the most studied health intervention in our continent's history. There was data collected in the neighborhood around Insight before Insight opened and data collected in the neighborhood around Insight after Insight opened, and it shows that there was no increase in drug use. What did occur is it brought people who were using drugs inside off the street into a safe place, brought them out of the alleys into a healthcare environment where there was someone to respond to an overdose. Since these additional half dozen plus injection sites have opened in Vancouver since the winter of 2016, they've received over 200,000 visits. There's been hundreds of overdoses and not one death at any of them.
Can you talk a little bit about how we can get accurate data about drug use? And the reason I ask that is that very often when you are making an attempt to compare a drug use rate prior to and after decriminalization or prior to and after legalization, you have to contend with the reality that people might be differently willing to admit to drug use based on the change in the status of a particular drug. So how does science and the statistical world account for that when we talk about pre and post drug use levels?
Sure. I mean, there is a challenge there. But especially in Vancouver, but also across the United States, researchers have been working on this question for a long time. Academic researchers, scientists, were actually really involved in establishing Insight. There was a couple of fantastic doctors named Thomas Kerr and Evan Wood, who worked in the community for long enough to sort of build up a repertoire with drug users. There's all sorts of they build safeguards into this research now that sort of tries to compensate for different changes in people's opinions. This is pretty well established science now, in Vancouver at least more than 30 years old, and in a lot of areas in the United States, much more established than people might think.
Can you talk a little bit about where in the world we can look to for results about models that are sort of in the style of what's being done in Vancouver? I mean, I know colloquially people often like to talk about Portugal, and sometimes we'll incorrectly hear policy ascribed to Portugal that's not exactly accurate. So sort of like what other models around the world are there that are relevant here?
Well, Portugal is a good one for us to look to. That's where they implemented decriminalization over a decade ago. But like you said, I agree with you. It's not a perfect comparison for North America right now because Portugal has never had to deal with fentanyl. And like we were saying a minute ago, decriminalization would not remove fentanyl from organized crime. So, but there are there's other aspects of the Portugal story that I think we should look at. When they decriminalized drugs, when they, in some people's minds, made drug use more acceptable, drug use did not increase. Drug use decreased. Overdose deaths decreased. The spread of HIV decreased. So the Portugal story is not perfect, but I think we can look to it because there's a lot of successes there.
We've been speaking with Travis Lupick. He's an award-winning journalist, also author of the book Fighting for Space, How a Group of Drug Users Transformed One City's Struggle with Addiction. Travis, really great work, and I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's been quite a genesis to Donald Trump's position about what he knew and what his involvement was related to this entire Stormy Daniels scandal. At one point, it was he knew nothing about anything. At another point, it's he had no idea that there was money paid to her. At another point, the position was he never paid back Michael Cohen. And then Rudy Giuliani took basically all sides of that issue and then backed it off and said he actually misspoke. We now have effectively a formal acknowledgement because of a disclosure that Donald Trump has put out that he repaid Michael Cohen somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 in expenses incurred during the 2016 presidential election. And the disclosure form that's been filed by Donald Trump doesn't say exactly what those repayments were for. But of course, the timing and the amount suggests that it would be for the $130,000 in hush money that we know Donald Trump's lawyer paid to adult film actress Stormy Daniels through his shell consultancy company called Essential Consultants, so that she wouldn't talk about her affair with Donald Trump shortly before the 2016 election. And as usual, everything is a distortion. Some would call them lies. I call them lies. Trump's people, even in explaining the disclosure, are trying to paint a completely inaccurate picture, saying that Donald Trump didn't even have to make this disclosure, but he's such a good guy and he's so into being transparent that he chose out of his goodwill to make this financial disclosure. Even that's not true. The Office of Government Ethics said, yeah, no, this is required information that Donald Trump actually has to report. And hilariously, this specific information was put in a footnote, right? The idea that your actions reflect some overarching desire for a high level of transparency are not exactly evidenced by a footnote, which is just laughable at its face. And none of this is shocking, right? I mean, from day one, it was clear that Donald Trump repaid Michael Cohen. The billionaire Donald Trump obviously paid back the lawyer that reportedly needed to mortgage his house or his condo or whatever it was to get this $130,000 to give to Stormy Daniels. So the question for me is, when will the Trumpists hold Trump accountable, either for his lies or the immorality of his actions? And by the immorality, I don't mean the affair. I don't care about Trump's affair with Stormy Daniels. I mean the bullying of Stormy Daniels. And the answer is they're never going to hold him accountable for it. So all we really learned from this is, I guess, nothing, right? I mean, we confirmed a few things. We confirmed, number one, that they've been lying all along about the repayment, because they've told us multiple versions about it that can't all be true. Number two, we confirmed that Trump did pay back the money. Number three, we've confirmed that there are still legal questions about the repayment as campaign spending. And will we ever actually get to the bottom of that? I don't know. And number four, we learned that Trump has likely been lying when he said he never knew anything at any point about any of this stuff. And as a side note, the disclosures also claim, and this is actually pretty interesting to me, the disclosures Trump filed yesterday also claim that revenue at Mar-a-Lago is down 10% compared to last year. A lot of charity events have canceled their scheduled events at Mar-a-Lago. And also Trump's Doral Golf Resort is down about 14% in revenue. So that's notable because we knew that there was, even though the Trump businesses continue to make a ton of money, the presidency has not been great for some of the businesses, although presumably really good for stuff like foreign diplomats staying at Trump's Washington, D.C. hotel. And you can tell that they are worried about the possible legal implications here because the Trumpists are now saying stuff like, Michael Avenatti is way outside of his scope as the lawyer of Stormy Daniels. He's just a lawyer. He can look into whatever he wants. He can tweet about whatever he wants, right? He's not restricted in what he can do. And there are actually Trumpists who, after Michael Avenatti tweeted about, we know that the money was paid back by Trump, we know about the shell company, we know about all this stuff, they were saying, the problem is Avenatti, who's supposed to just be representing Stormy Daniels, tweeting about it. That's not the problem. This is like with leaks, where if the Republicans like the content of the leaks, they don't care how we learned about it. If they don't like the content of the leaks, the problem is that there was a leak, and that's really what we should be focused on. Avenatti can do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, and one of those committed Trumpists is Rudy Giuliani, who's back in the media circuit now saying that the president can't be indicted, and apparently he was told that by the Mueller team. Oh, yeah. Now, that's for a different issue. That's for the Russia stuff. But, hey, I mean, with the campaign finance violations that could be here, Trump could be in trouble for, like, accessory after the fact or co-conspiracy. There could be some charges there.
Conceivably. Although I still think it's unlikely we ever see an indictment of Trump. Like, I believe that the president can be indicted, but I believe that the president will not be indicted. And whether Rudy Giuliani has any clue what he's talking about at this point is an outstanding question mark, I guess I would say. I have video for you today that's so insane that I initially really wasn't sure whether it was some kind of strange satire, although we've since learned that it's not. I have video of a relatively young white guy in a New York City restaurant. It's a chain restaurant called Fresh Kitchen. Seems like kind of a sandwich and salad type place. I'm not familiar with it. And in a story originally reported by Latino Rebels, we have video of a white guy who was just furious because he heard Spanish being spoken by employees in a restaurant, which if you've ever been to New York City, you know is not exactly a rare occurrence, right? One of the things I liked about living in New York City was that at a lot of my favorite neighborhood spots in Brooklyn, for example, I could go in and directly speak my native tongue of Spanish to the staff. The great Italian place that I liked in Soho, a burger place in Brooklyn, a great Israeli restaurant on the Upper East Side, wherever. I like the fact that you go in and I could speak Spanish with the staff. Needless to say, if you live in New York City, I don't know how you would be even remotely surprised about walking into a restaurant and hearing staff speaking Spanish. So this guy shows up and he starts screaming and ranting and raving about how inappropriate it is to be speaking Spanish in the restaurant because this is America. And the reaction of the people in the restaurant was basically to laugh and ask the guy to leave, which inflamed him even more and got him to say these people are probably undocumented. And my next phone call is to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And Facebook user Edward Suazo uploaded the video to his account a couple days ago, wrote that his wife and her best friend had been chatting in Spanish with a waiter when this guy jumps in and the following chaos ensues.
Clients at your staff is speaking Spanish to customers when they should be speaking
very violent. I mean, sometimes they do.
Every person I listen to, he spoke it, she's speaking it. It's America.
He's very ignorant.
It's fucked up.
He's very ignorant. And he shouldn't be allowed.
I will be following up. And my guess is they're not documented. So my next call is to ICE to have each one of them kicked out of my country. If they have the balls to come here and live off of my money, I pay for their welfare, I pay for their ability to be here. The least they can do is
Their welfare?
Yes,
Such an ignorant
you intend on running a place in Midtown Manhattan, your staff should be speaking English, not Spanish.
Because of people like you, our nation
Honey, I'm calling ICE.
Call ICE. So that they can see.
Maybe you shouldn't eat that sandwich today. Take a break from the food.
Maybe you should get hit by a car, you piece of shit.
So the guy has been identified online as a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan, and I'm not even going to give you the guy's name. He's getting doxxed, and I just don't want to participate in that stuff, but he's been identified. His online listings have been flooded with negative reviews. The New York State Bar Association was contacted. They said they're aware of the situation, but they don't really do attorney discipline. Reportedly, the law firm he works for offers services in not only Spanish, but many other languages. I don't think there should be any official disciplinary repercussions here, right? The guy's free to say whatever he wants. Obviously, if he crosses the line into some kind of threat of violence or something that would be criminal, there would be legal repercussions. But people are free not to hire this guy if they're put off by his comments, which I would be because he seems like an absolute lunatic. But here's where it starts to get even more interesting. In online comments that started appearing about this guy, people said, hey, we recognize this guy. This guy is on video at far-right rallies in New York City, including one from, I think, about a year ago, where he showed up and verbally attacked a rabbi as being a fake Jew. Quite a special guy, this guy. In another video, again, a guy who looks startlingly similar to this guy is taunting a group of Jews and flipping them off with his middle finger. Here's one video, and it does look like the same guy. Take a look.
That's true Judaism.
You are not a Jew. 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 You are not a Jew.
Are you a Jew?
I've been to Israel twice.
You don't stand.
Why?
You are not.
So back to the original video. I actually think just laughing him out of a restaurant is sort of the way to handle this, right? He wants others to be angry that Spanish is being spoken. And the totally nonplussed reaction of, okay, yeah, Spanish is being spoken. All right, what? That's way better than people starting to yell at him and become aggressive, because it's the indifference to the fact that, yeah, Spanish is being spoken in New York City. That's what I think will most frustrate people like this. They want everybody to be mad like they're mad. And when nobody gets mad, this guy hates it.
Yeah, I feel like the restaurant manager should have been a little bit more assertive, but you never really know how you're going to react until something like that happens.
Yeah.
And you can tell that this guy holds these racist and xenophobic views, but I'm sure he doesn't go out and do this every day. Something definitely set him off beforehand.
I guess. I mean, if he did it every day, if every time you see people speaking Spanish in a restaurant, you do this, we'd have hundreds and hundreds of videos of the guy, unless this is like the first time in years he went to a restaurant and he was shocked that at a restaurant in New York City, people were speaking Spanish. People like this guy want trouble. They want reactions. They want conflict. And I say laughing it off and say, we don't care, just go away is actually a good approach. And it is not a good week for this guy. If you look at what's happening to this guy online, and I don't endorse any of it, but it's really bad what's happening to this guy, it is not a good week for him. That I can assure you. All right, today's a very special day. It is the birthday of David Pakman Show producer and marketing extraordinaire, Noah Ferguson. And what we are doing today to celebrate Noah Ferguson's birthday, I don't think he knows we're doing this. We had to sort of keep it quiet with the internal systems that we use, and we had to throw out some false flags to prevent him from knowing about it. Noah Ferguson used to be a caller to the David Pakman Show, and I went back and found a voicemail that he left for us about 7 years ago, before he was an intern, before he was a part-time employee, before he was a full-time employee. And I'm going to play it for you. And I know that he's aware of this voicemail, and he also says that he doesn't stand by some of the things that he says in the voicemail. Okay, let's take a listen to this classic voicemail that once made it on the show from current David Pakman Show producer Noah Ferguson on his birthday. Take a listen.
Hey, David, Lewis, and that other guy. Just kidding. Hey, Nathan. Noah here from Richmond, Virginia. I had a question for you guys. I've only been listening to the show for about a year or so, so I'm not really sure if you've addressed this before. But I was wondering, living in a state that Obama was guaranteed to win, such as Massachusetts, if you ever considered voting for a more progressive third-party candidate like Jill Stein or Stuart Alexander, not because they had any chance of winning, but I guess in hope of giving them a little more attention and possibly even someday a voice on the mainstream stage, maybe years and years and years from now, as opposed to voting for Obama, who I've heard you say many times is not progressive enough. Of course, living in a battleground state like Virginia, I voted for Obama to avoid the Romney presidency, but I was wondering what your voting strategies are as progressives living in a solidly blue state.
Exactly.
Maybe you think the Democrats will become more progressive with time, and the best way to promote that is to give them a larger percentage of the vote. I don't know. Just hoping to get your thoughts on that.
All right, so
thanks, you guys. I enjoy the show. Keep up the great work.
So as you can tell, I would rank this voicemail at about a 7.5.
Yes.
He was not on speakerphone. He had a signal. We could hear him clearly. He inserted a lot of questions into it, and it did carry on a little bit, but this was a completely novice Noah Ferguson calling in. So I think that if he were to call into the show today, he would not leave such a long voicemail.
Oh yeah, he had a lot of practice in the meantime. So I think if he was to do this again, it would be a lot higher quality.
No question about it, but still about a 7.5. And happy birthday to Noah. He's doing great work on the show, and congratulations to him for having had a voicemail played on the show 7 years ago.
I like how he said, "Hey, David, Lewis, and that other guy." I mean, that's pretty funny. Who's that other guy?
Well, that was a thing that was happening at the time, that people would call in and refer to Natan as the other guy. And so he was kind of playing that up. He knew who the other guy was. As he said, "Hey, Natan, what's going on?" Happy birthday, Noah. We've got a great bonus show for you. Join at joinpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.